And Jesus said, There was a rich man who had much money. He said, I shall use my money to sow and reap, and plant, and fill my storehouses with produce, so that I lack nothing. These were the things he was thinking in his heart. But that same night he died. Whoever has ears, let him hear. The Gospel of Thomas, saying 63. Friends, I'd like to tell you a story with Jesus' words in mind. In the quiet little town of Maple Hollow, the sunsets rolled across golden fields and life moved slow. Except for Earl Henson, who never seemed to stop moving. Earl was the richest man in town, owner of the towering grain elevator that rose above Main Street like a monument to his ambition. Folks said it could be seen from every farm road, its shadow stretching across the town like the mark of the man who'd made it. Earl worked harder than anyone. He rose before dawn, counted every bushel, and wrote every check himself. His silos were full, his barns immaculate, and his trucks always new. Yet something deeper inside him was empty. His wife, Martha, used to tell him, Earl, you've got everything except peace. But he'd just smile and say, Peace doesn't buy land, sweetheart. He hadn't been to church in over a decade. Sundays, he said, were for planning. Now, one evening, standing atop his grain elevator, Earl watched the sun sink behind his fields. Next year, he whispered to himself, I'll build another silo, maybe two. That way I'll never have to worry again. He didn't notice the scripture calendar tacked on the wall of his office, the one local pastor Gibbons had given him years ago. The verse for that day read, Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, but store up treasures in heaven. Well, that night, he sat in his recliner, drawing up blueprints for expansion, his radio murmuring softly. A preacher's voice drifted through the static, reciting the words of Jesus. There was a rich man who said, I will fill my storehouses so that I lack nothing. But that same night, his life was required of him. Earl chuckled to himself. Funny timing, and closed his eyes just for a moment. He never woke up. At his funeral, the pastor read that very same passage. The townsfolk shifted uneasily, their eyes flickering to the great white silos in the distance. Everyone knew the story wasn't just ancient, it was theirs. A week later, Jacob Henson, Earl's son, came to sort through his father's papers. Amid stacks of invoices, he found a Bible, worn but opened, to the same parable. Earl had underlined one sentence. So it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God. And beside it, in his father's shaky handwriting, were the words, Maybe I built the wrong kind of storehouse. And Jacob sat there for a long while, tears dripping into the faded pages. That winter, Jacob made a decision that stunned the whole town. Instead of selling the property, he turned the old feed store into a community food pantry. He called it the Harvest House. Families who had once sold their grain to Earl now received it freely. Farmers brought in donations, and every Saturday, volunteers filled boxes with food, prayed over them, and shared scripture with those in need. The massive grain elevator still stood, but its purpose had changed. No longer a symbol of one man's wealth, it became a beacon of God's provision. The town pastor often preached beside it on summer evenings, pointing up at the glowing silos as the sun dipped low, and saying, "Earl Henson built to hold grain, but God rebuilt this place to hold grace." Well, years later, people in Maple Hollow still told Earl's story. The man who filled every barn but left his heart empty. They said that when the light hit the elevator just right at sunset, it shimmered gold, as if heaven itself were reminding them, the measure of your life isn't in what you store, it's in what you share. And each time the church bells rang across the fields, the people of Maple Hollow would whisper the words of Jesus once more, letting them sink deep into their hearts. Whoever has ears, let him hear. Truth. God bless you, my friends.